So welcome back everybody to our series on trust, our Trust 101 series. This is our third video in the second module. This video we're focusing on, now that I've been installed as a trustee and I've notified everybody, what do I do next? What's the next step? What are my first steps as a trustee? And so the answer to that depends a little bit on whether my beneficiary is incapacitated, like I'm taking care of an aging parent and just paying bills for them, managing the assets for their benefit, or they're passed away and now I'm going to do full trust administration, collect assets, pay off debts, and then distribute the trust assets to the beneficiaries of the trust. I'm going to do a deep dive on some of those things in the upcoming videos, but in this particular video I just want to share some thoughts and tips from our experience about preliminary steps that you can take that are really critical and important, that often get missed or forgotten by people who serve as trustees without legal counsel. And the planning aspect of that and the preliminary aspect of that is really critical, and hopefully it helps you. So the very first step, and I'll give you three, the first step in what do I do now is to take a look at the actual will and the trust. And yes, I mean, you can read it, and it's important that you do, and you'd be shocked at how many people are trustees and they haven't really looked at the terms of the trust themselves. And it's really critical to do that because we need to know a few things. And the first thing is, who is involved? Who are the beneficiaries? Who are the heirs? We need that in order to provide the notice that we talked about on the previous video. But we also need to know who's going to be involved in the distribution plan. Who gets assets? Do they get a specific gift of an asset, or do they participate in a percentage of the whole, what we call the residue or the residuary gift? And if those people are receiving assets, we want to know who they are, and we want to know how to contact them. We're going to need addresses, we're going to need phone numbers, we're going to need email addresses, all of those things. So start by identifying who the players are by reading the will and the trust. And if it's family, you probably pretty much know who's involved already, but sometimes people come in as a successor or a backup trustee and they don't know everybody involved. Or they don't know that they actually have to include people who may have been listed previously, and then there was an amendment to the trust or a change where the grantor said, well, I was going to give this asset to this person, but I changed my mind and now I'm going to give this asset to someone else. Well, you still have to notify those prior people as part of the notice process that I talked about in my earlier video. But as part of your preliminary work as a trustee, identify who the players are, figure out their contact information. If you don't know, then you're going to need to do some research and track them down. And there are people that help with that. There's private investigators, there's heir search firms that will go looking for those folks, and so there's ways to do that. So that's the first thing, is to figure out who's involved by reading the will and the trust. Secondly, look deeply at the distribution plan. And I mentioned just a second ago, specific gifts versus residuary gifts. And specific gifts are critical in a trust because that's where somebody's giving a specific dollar amount to a specific individual or charity, or they're giving a specific asset, like a gift of personal property or a gift of real property to a certain person. Specific gifts are important in trust administration because generally speaking, the person who receives that specific gift is actually entitled to any income from it after the date of death. And so trustees sometimes make the mistake of including rents or proceeds of income from assets into the general trust pot, so to speak, and it really belongs to the person that gets the specific gift unless there's some other agreement. So I really want to know who my specific gift beneficiaries are early and identify them and get in contact with them quickly and determine if there's any reason why they can't receive it or why I can't give them that gift. And then the next thing in trust administration is figuring out what I need to do to comply with my duty to protect, preserve, and maintain trust property. And as a trustee, I have to do those things. And one of the best ways that we can protect and preserve trust property is making sure that insurance policies are in place. That's for vehicles, houses, things like that. And so figuring out who the insurance agent is or where the policies are located, have the premiums been paid in full? Are we current with those things? This is really, really critical, because if you become a trustee of a trust and now all of a sudden there's a fire at an income property, or you got a little investment property or something like that, and the house burns down, and the previous trustee or the grantor maybe let the insurance policy lapse, we're in a lot of trouble, because now we have an asset that we didn't preserve and protect and maintain. So think early about insurance and whether or not we have those policies in place. So another thing that we want to do is make a list of all of the trust assets that we're aware of. That could be real estate, it could be personal property, like farm equipment or vehicles. We don't necessarily need to list all the furnishing and the fixtures and the clothing or something in someone's house, but generally be aware of what those things are. And bank accounts, stock accounts, investments, small business stocks, anything like that that we believe are trust assets. You start making a list of those things, which we would call an inventory, and we begin to get ready for the appraisal process, because those assets, when somebody passes away, need to be appraised as part of our duties as a trustee. And it also helps the beneficiaries, because it gives them a tax basis step up as of the date of death for the assets. They get reappraised at that number. So it helps them, when they receive those assets, to have a higher tax basis. But we can't do that unless we know what assets are out there. So we want to make a list of those trust assets and figure out which ones are in the trust and which ones aren't. In a future video, we'll talk about what to do when assets are not in the trust and get into that in a lot more detail. But really important to understand, for an asset to be in the trust, it means that it's titled in the name of the trustee of the trust. And it could be the prior trustee of the trust. But if it says the grantor of the trust individually, if it's just in their name, then it's not in the trust. And if it says, Joe Smith, trustee of the Joe Smith Trust, then the asset is titled in the name of the trust. Real property is really easy to tell, because you've got a deed on title and the trustee can be vested there. Bank accounts are easy to tell because you have an income or account statement that says that. Investment accounts are easy to tell as well, because it'll say that. Personal property, a little bit more difficult, because there's no pink slip or deed or whatever for your couch. But as a general rule, all of those assets are going to be funded to the trust through a document called a general assignment when people did their initial estate planning, and it sort of catches and scoops up all that personal property that doesn't have evidence of title into the trust. The only exception to that would be if somebody wrote in their will or in a document called a personal property memorandum that they wanted some small item of personal property, tangible property, to go to a specific individual, and it wasn't of a significant value, generally not more than $5,000 for any specific item. A personal property memorandum, if you're not familiar with it, then I encourage you to go to our website, lawvex.com/ppm, for personal property memorandum. And I've got a video there that explains it. And we even have a self-help tool. You can make your own personal property memorandum on our website, absolutely no cost, using software that we developed. And you can list those tangible personal property items that you'd like to give away as part of your estate plan. There are some special requirements, so I encourage you to check out the video and see what those are. But assuming that a trust did not say that I've got a personal property memorandum and I haven't given any of that personal property away, then all my furniture, my coffee maker, and everything else that I own that doesn't have a deed or a pink slip is part of the trust. And you want to get in and figure out generally what's there, because I can tell you from experience, people have a tendency to have access to people's homes, and they show up and they like to think that they're entitled to help themselves to pretty much everything in the house. And there can be some significant assets in a house. People have a tendency to store cash, valuables, jewelry, gold, things like that. So preliminarily, as a tip to a trustee of a trust, after you figure out who the players are, what the assets are, you want to quickly move to protect and preserve personal property assets. Make sure you get locks changed on the house and identify what personal property is there. You can even use your cell phone and video camera and take some pictures and figure out what's in there, just so that you're really doing the best that you can to make sure that the people who are entitled to those gifts in the future are going to be able to receive them from you, because you have a duty to protect that for them. So those are some good strategies and tips. Making sure that you've got insurance, making sure that you take custody of personal property, figure out what the trust says if there's any specific gifts that need to be dealt with quickly. Doing those things will really get you a good start in your plan as a trustee and how you're going to handle trust administration going forward. So stay tuned for more deep dive videos on how to get certain kinds of assets. In our next video, we'll talk about that. And in future videos, we'll get into details like, what do I do if I've got assets that are not in the trust? How do I get them into the trust? So hang in there with us and keep checking out these videos.